What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we are checking out the Peavey Windsor. Let's do it. Alright guys, hope you're doing great out there today. If this is your first time here at my channel, my name is Kyle, and what I do is I take awesome high gain amps, guitars, cabs, speakers, pickups, overdrives. I record them with a simple SM57 setup, and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. So if you're into E-standard thrash riffs, drop C hardcore riffs, and dudes that hate themselves after recording cringy intros to their videos, you're in the right place. Consider hitting the like button and subscribing on the way out so you don't miss any more of my stuff. Thanks! Alright guys, here is yet another amp that has been a long time coming on the channel. This is the Peavey Windsor all-tube single-channel amplifier. Many of my viewers have asked me to review this amplifier because number one, they know that I am a huge fan of Peavey amps for high gain tones. And number two, the Windsor kind of has a cult following. It has this reputation as a really good modded Marshall sleeper amp on an extreme budget. And I think that that just generates a lot of intrigue, especially on my channel where we focus on a lot of modded Marshall style tones for thrash metal and hardcore. So it makes perfect sense to me. Now with all that being said, I have never really been that big of a fan of this amp. It's got a couple of really weird shortcomings to me that really keep it from being that cult status super sleeper thrash or modded Marshall high gain amplifier. The very first thing, and most importantly, is when you really push the preamp, and what I mean by that is when you stick a really hot boost or really hot pickups in front of this amp, it almost seems to kind of overload the preamp when you push the gain up high on the Windsor itself as well, and creates this sort of like a weird swelling effect. When you hit palm mutes, when you hit really loud open chords or anything like that, it's almost like that additional signal that's going into the front end of the amp overloads it and it kind of swells for a second. It kind of starts out a little bit quiet and then kind of comes back to normal volume. Now, with this particular amp, I have owned probably 6 or 7 Windsors, and every single one, I always want to like it. I always want to use it as a mod platform, but every single one that I've owned have always done it. With this particular one, I still notice it, but it doesn't seem to be quite as prevalent as it was on the other ones, or maybe I'm just not remembering correctly because it's been a while since I've played one. But that is the main reason that I've never been able to get into these, is I boost everything, and you have to boost this very hard in order to get it into high gain territory. And when you do that, it creates that really odd issue. The second thing that I've never really liked about these amps is when you start to push the power section, they fall apart very quickly. Now, when these amps came out, they were like $400 brand new. Granted, that was 15 years ago when inflation wasn't anywhere near what it was right now, and we hadn't experienced all of the supply chain issues and everything else that have happened in the recent years, but that was still an insanely cheap price for an all-tube amplifier. So the reason that I mention this to you is I'm sure that Peavey cheaped out on the transformers on this amp. I am sure that they are under spec for the 100 watts that the amp is rated for, probably built with cheap components as well, and therefore when you turn this amp up, it starts to sound thin and harsh and just really not good. So those are the reasons that I've never been a fan of this amp, but with that out of the way, I wanted to be transparent with you guys. I'm gonna try and make this amp sound as good as I can for the types of tones that I do. So why don't we go ahead and jump into that. For that intro clip, I was using my Balaguer Typhon that I almost just threw at you with the Seymour Duncan distortion in the bridge. I'm gonna bring all the EQ controls back to noon. We're gonna turn that preamp volume, which is actually, you know, the gain, down to 9 o'clock. We're gonna turn the resonance and presence back to noon. And there's also a texture knob over here that goes from Class AB to Class A, and it kind of gives you the ability to shape how the power section reacts a little bit. For the most part, I'm gonna leave it on full power, but we will experiment with that a little bit as well. So yeah, let's flip this out of standby. Here we go. All right, so as is, it is a little bit dead on the top end. Let's turn that presence, let's turn that treble up. Now that sounds much more in line with a plexi style tone where the top end has that kind of Marshall Kerrang to it. So yeah, I'm also going to push the mids a little bit and just a little bit of bass because it is a little thin as we have it right now. For that type of tone, it honestly doesn't sound bad at all. Let's push that preamp gain up just a little bit more. If you were looking for sort of a vintage JCM 800 or JMP inspired tone on an extreme budget, I think that this amp kind of accomplishes that pretty well when you keep the gain lower. All right, so that's enough of that type of tone. You guys are here for the thrash metal and the hardcore riffs. Let's go ahead and push that gain up and try to get this thing a little bit more saturated. We're putting it up to noon. So just like that, we have a good bit of saturation. We're gonna turn the resonance up. I'm actually gonna turn the presence down because the presence seems to control a very not pleasant frequency on this amp. All right, so immediately, it sounds good for the low to mid gain stuff. I'm actually kind of digging that. I'm gonna pull the presence back just a tad. We're gonna turn that gain up a little bit more and go for like a post-hardcore style riff. Sounds really good for that type of thing. Honestly, I'm impressed with the lower gain tones. It's not something that I ever really messed with when I originally had this amp because I like to get belligerent and I like to push that gain up. So just kind of briefly exploring those types of tones on this amp, it doesn't sound bad. If we were to push that preamp gain up just a little bit more, all right, so yeah, the bass is starting to get kind of out of control. It really does fatten it up when you do push the preamp gain, much like it would on a JCM 800. So let's roll that bass back a little bit. I want a little bit more mid and a little bit less treble. So we are starting to get saturated, but it is sounding pretty muddy. It's sounding pretty congested in the low mids. If we push the preamp volume even higher, it really starts to affect the overall tone. So let's pull the bass back and see if we can kind of tighten that up a little bit. Let's see if the resonance is adding to that at all as well. Let's pull that back. So overall, it has a little bit more gain than a stock JCM 800 might have. Let's go ahead and max that preamp gain out just to show you the max amount of gain it's capable of without a boost. But again, it's got that real fat, kind of overloaded type sound to it. So we're gonna dial that back and we're gonna dig into the boost pretty early in this demo because this amp needs it to get into the high gain territory. So let's start off with the old trusty TS9. We've got it dialed like you would a TS9 in front of a Marshall. So pretty much all of our low end has disappeared. Let's add some low end back in the preamp. All right, so let's add a little bit more mid and a little bit more treble. Let's pull the treble back. Let's try adding a little presence. I can tell if I were standing out in front of the amp, that would sound really harsh. So the presence just doesn't do it like the normal Peavey presence control does. It's just focused a little bit lower, I think, in a harsh frequency. That just doesn't sound good. Yeah, it sounds pretty weak to me overall, guys. Let's pump the bass a little bit more. Sounds fuller now, but the bass has a significant effect on the overall EQ of the channel. Let's turn a little bit of resonance on to see if we can fill out the low end. So, therefore, we now have some low end punch, but it has kind of added a lot of low mid to our signal as well. So that was the TS9. Let's try the SD1. The SD1 cuts a little bit more low mid than the TS9 does. But with that, it also has less output. What happens when we add some drive from the pedal? And that actually sounds pretty good. This one definitely sounds better than I remember any of the other ones that I owned sounding, but maybe I'm just better at dialing things in now. It's not a bad little thrash tone if we're being honest. Let's actually go back to the TS9 and let's try to add some drive from this pedal as well. So overall, definitely better, but it still just has way too much of a low mid thing going on. So with the MXR M77 Overdrive, we're actually able to turn off the bump switch, which takes out a lot of the low mids from the signal. I don't know, I think that one probably sounds the best out of all of them so far, but let's go ahead, let's go back to this Friedman Buxom boost. There's no ability to add gain from this, and I realize, I know a lot of people are gonna complain about me running overdrives in front of the Windsor and not being able to hear the amp by itself, but to get the type of tones that the people who watch my channel want to get, you have to do this. So go ahead and leave me an angry comment, and if this is your first time here, I look forward to your complaints. All right, so that almost seems like too much output. Let's pull the boost back on the pedal. So with this particular boost, I am noticing that swell effect where the volume kind of seems to change. I don't know if the mic will pick it up. It's kind of subtle, but it's just a really weird effect where it seems like the preamp for a split second is just getting hit too hard with signal in the front. It seems like the trick with this amp is to not add a boost with too much output, but to add some gain from the pedal in order to increase and add to the saturation of the amp itself. And that's kind of where you get the best of both worlds and you start getting some pretty good tones out of this thing. So we're gonna go back to the MXR M77. I'm gonna turn the 100 Hertz up. We're gonna add a little bit more gain from the pedal. We're gonna dial a little bit of preamp volume back, and we're gonna go for one more thrash tone before we go down to drop C. All right, so that right there, very reminiscent to me of a boosted JCM 800. It's got that same type of thuddy low end that Marshalls have even when you boost them. It's lacking a little bit of that upper mid grind. It seems to be slightly more modern voice in the mids. One thing that we haven't touched on, there is a boost button here. All that really does is boost the volume in the mids though. It does not add any saturation. I'm gonna turn it on for just a second just to show you. So that really reminds me of when you push an EL34's type power amp to the point of saturation and it just kind of starts to become all mids and no low end and no top end and just sound really ugly. So that's what that boost reminds me of. And then finally, we're gonna play a couple chords with this texture. I'm just gonna kind of dial it as I go. We're gonna keep it all the way up top to start, and then I will slowly move it as I play. So yeah, the further over that you dial it to the low power setting, the more soft it gets, the less defined it gets, and it kind of gets more of a mushier feel. Okay guys, finally we're gonna check this amp out with drop C. I do have a guitar with active pickups. I wanna try that real quick as well, and then we're gonna call it a day on this, but here is the amp in drop C. I'm actually going to switch over to the Boss SD1 and we're gonna add some gain from the pedal. All right, so drop C, it sounds less bad than I thought it was gonna sound, if that's one way to put it. Let's turn the resonance back and the bass back just a little bit. All right, guys, let's check this thing out with an active pickup, see if that makes a difference, and then we're done. All right, guys, I have my Schecter PT SLS Elite here, and in the bridge, we've got the Ryan Fluff Bruce Signature Fishman pickup. Let's hear how this thing sounds with an active pickup. Okay, I immediately like that better on this particular amp. It definitely carves out a lot of those ugly low mids, adds some nice upper mids. Let's go a little bit heavier on the bass and the resonance just to give it some fullness. Alright guys, that is going to do it for me today on the Peavey Windsor. What did you guys think? Do you own this amp? Have you ever played it? Do you have any experience with it? What did you think about the tones that I was able to achieve on my end? And do you agree with my assessment, or do you hear it totally differently? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be sure to meet you down there to talk about it. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like button on the way out, subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming amp demos and other things like that. I am falling apart here. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Kyle here again. We'll see you next time.
You know what this wall is missing? Another amp. There we go.